Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel, with your host Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone, welcome out to another Truth Be Told session, and today is a very special session. We've been looking forward to this. As you can see, it's not just the ugly mugs of Mike and myself on the screen. We have two gentlemen from Arkansas joining us today that we're going to interview and have them interact with each other. And today is, what is it, September the 20th, 2023. I always like to give the date for later reference because you can look back and kind of remember what else was going on. So we're closing out summertime in just a couple of more days. And here in the Central Valley of California is always a great time of year because we've endured about 3 straight months of close to 100-degree weather, many days, and which was great when I was a kid playing ball. But as I get older, I try to avoid the heat. And so this time of year, we start cooling down. This week's going to be in the 80s, which is not real cool, but compared to 100 degrees, it's really nice.
Exactly.
It's harvest time in Central California, the tomatoes and all of the nut crops and the fruit and vegetable crops of all types, lots of corn, lots of alfalfa for the dairy farms and everything is in full swing. Now, the only bad thing about that is the way that almonds and corn and some of the other crops are harvested requires a lot of sweeping of dirt, a lot of throwing stuff up in the air. So even though the weather gets cooler and nicer in many ways, it's probably the dirtiest time of the year.
Right.
Towards the air, September and October. And so a lot of our church members really don't like this time of year because allergies, and really plays havoc on people's respiratory systems. But we enjoy, mostly we enjoy this time of year. And joining me is Mike Maney, of course, my partner in crime up in Missoula, Montana. He's talking about it's in the 60s up there. And joining us is 2 brethren from Arkansas, Brother Tim Carter, and in the striped shirt is Brother Eddie Johnson. I have that name right, don't I?
That is correct.
Okay, I've never seen you live. This is as close to live as we'll get, 2,000 miles away.
Right.
First time I've spoken to you, so thank you for joining us, and we look forward to our time together.
My pleasure.
Well, good. Well, first of all, what I'd like to ask both of you is, I've connected with Brother Carter's website and YouTube channel just over the last few months, and I'm really enjoying his Koine sessions. And as I told him on the one time we talked on the phone, you really have to reconfigure your brain when you listen to one of his sessions because he approaches it differently than anyone I've ever watched or heard. And it's really unique and fascinating, just his general approach. And so you really have to pay attention. You can't really just like a lot of YouTubes, you kind of drift in and out and you're doing other things and you're kind of listening in the background.
Like people do with our site.
Yeah, like they do.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Well, with me, actually, I have to sit down and digest for a while to try to catch up with what it is that he's saying. And I'll think to myself, oh, yeah, that does make sense.
It does after about the 3rd or 4th time watching it.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's right.
So thank you for doing that for us, Brother Carter. And first thing I'd like to ask both of you, I think Brother Carter said one time, you were boyhood friends or early in your life you became friends or something like that. And since we've never talked to both of you together before, could you share that story if it's okay to publicize it?
Yes, I'll start and then let him take over since
Let him correct you.
he's the Greek geek. So he's like a mentor. And at the seminary, my first year at the Missionary Baptist Seminary in 1987 was my first year to be a missionary Baptist. I mean, as an adult, I had joined Landmark Missionary Baptist Church. Of course, it was like a background check. They want to know when I was baptized, March 14th, 1974. They wanted to know about the church that baptized me. I don't think they take baptisms after 75 from that situation. It was a systemic breakdown in something called the Southern Baptist Convention. They had tried a super denominational across the board approach to shift drastically at that time. And my dad just, I guess, left the church during that time. And I didn't return to any kind of New Testament church till 1987. And my first year at Landmark to join and then to go to seminary, that's where I met Eddie Johnson. And
I believe you told me that you'd been a missionary Baptist 2 or 3 weeks when we met at the
it
seminary.
was fresh. I was so overwhelmed in their school. Of course, I wasn't supported to go to school. My father couldn't be more against me attending the seminary. But when I told him our theology professor was an engineer, and that the hermeneutics professor was a scientist, and the Greek teacher was a linguistic scholar, my dad said he didn't know there was such a thing as a smart preacher. So he thought we just sat there and drank coffee, and he knew I had a career and he didn't want me to waste it. And so here I met Dr. Johnson, and he spoke very fluently. He had already been, 2 years at the seminary?
No, I had a 2-year degree at the Missionary Baptist Seminary for music.
Yeah, he's a singing preacher.
That was back in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And I worked with a couple of churches in music and youth. And it was about 1985 that I started to perceive that I was being called to preach. And after a lot of soul searching, praying, and talking to preachers, I announced I called to preach, and then moved back to Little Rock to go to the Missionary Baptist Seminary. And we were both freshmen together my second time around at that time. And that's when we met and found out we both had really a love. We found out we had a love for the languages.
Absolutely.
And that was really where we bonded. And it turned out we started pastoring. The first churches we both pastored were like within 15 minutes of one another
We commuted to the
in
seminary.
Northeast Arkansas. And so for 3 years, we commuted back and forth to 4 days a week to Little Rock to go to school.
850 miles a week.
Yeah.
Mhm. Maybe to give you a
Highway,
little.
we called it highway theology.
Yeah, we wouldn't leave the windows down.
We have a lot of that in California
Yes.
because we fellowship a group of churches up and down this state, and this state is like 600 miles, top to bottom. And
Right.
so different meetings we'll go to, like it's 300 miles for me to drive to Los Angeles area. A lot of churches there we fellowship, and they have meetings, and so some of us will try to travel together, and so we have 5 or 6 straight hours at a time to just talk Bible.
Right.
And some of the best discussions I've had has been highway theology.
Well, and with us, so much of the time we were discussing, we had not every class together, but we had probably 90% of our classes together. And we were discussing lessons. We were discussing like what we'd learned in Greek class or Hebrew class or hermeneutics class or something like that. And it was just really a good way to bounce those ideas off of one another and reinforce the lessons we learned. And it helped us to be better students.
You
Well,
mentioned
we-
Brother John Penn. He was one of your professors. Who were some of the other professors at that time?
Well, Dr. Randy Murray was the language professor, and Dr. John Penn, hermeneutics, Dr. John Owen, systematic. We had Charles Rogers. What was his general epistles, I think?
General epistles, Romans, excuse me.
Yeah, L.D. Capel was still there.
L.D. Capel was still there.
Bob
Dr.
Frazier, he taught Galatians and
Right.
Hebrews, maybe.
Galatians and logic. And
And
it's interesting. Most of these men came from very professional backgrounds. Bob Frazier was a lawyer. John Owen was a structural engineer. Randy Murray was an accountant. Very structured, studied men, very professional, very academic in not only their background, but their approach to teaching us at the seminary. And they took the education that we received in literally in the Missionary Baptist Seminary in Little Rock is all about training preachers to be able to study the Bible for themselves.
Mhm.
And it took that training to levels I would have never imagined when I first decided to enroll there.
And then he
Maybe
won't
to-
tell you, but we're both research assistants for Dr. John Penn.
Mm.
And we feel like if he calls, we jump first.
Mhm.
We work for him, and we still seem to work for the theologian, Dr. Owen, and the language teacher, Dr. Murray, because whatever we do, we think of the standard that they would expect. But the school was quite different then. Even in graduate school, you'd wear a jacket and a tie, or you wouldn't enter Dr. Owen's class. And if you didn't make a B or more, you might as well have not taken the class. So, and I was from that background of strength through structure, discipline by design, factory, high, multiple machines, thousands of processes, hundreds of people. So everything was a pressure cooker. And like I said, Eddie's advantage that I really enjoyed was he was talented and he could sing, which I resented that,
Mhm.
but not privately. I wanted him to know publicly that, well, singing preachers hurt all of us. They go in, they sing, people fall in love with them, they call them the pastor, and we stay out in the rain and wait till they can call us in.
Right.
Because I preach a cappella. I have no skill whatsoever, but I really did. I always resented his talent, and he knew the teachers so well. And I'd never been in a school where people knew the teachers. I would leave and go straight to the factory my first few years there. I never knew what it was to know a professor directly or personally, but that's the only connection. Like I said, we connected because we had to, of necessity in some way.
Right.
And then after seminary, we stayed in touch because we would translate or word out the New Testament and share it with each other. And then some reason,
Well, it was just a situation where we had the same passion for biblical study.
yeah, we're not connected otherwise. It's a high utility relationship, high functioning, great utility. Other than that, if we had no outcome that was greater than the sum of its parts, I don't guess we would engage.
Probably
No, he let me buy breakfast this morning, but we'll talk
Oh,
later.
good. Maybe to give you a little frame of reference, because this video may go, if it goes on your YouTube channel, Brother Carter, there'll be a lot of people watch it that are not familiar with Mike and I. And on,
I'll make sure I put it on there.
and on ours, the opposite, a lot of people aren't familiar with both of you. So we may be, all four of us, introduced to new people around the country and
I hope
world.
so, because it would be good for them to get connected with people that labor in the word.
Mhm.
Well, just to
Always.
give you a frame of reference for Mike and I, in the early 80s, well, I live in Northern California, and growing up in missionary Baptist work, starting as a teenager, even before I started preaching at 18 years old, I would travel with my pastor. There'd be different extension schools sponsored by Little Rock or Bellflower, different ABA seminaries, and would travel to those if they were within 100 miles or so, like one night a week or 2 nights a week or on a Saturday or something. And that generally lasts about a year or two until the teachers would get in a squabble with each other or whatever. And then the school would kind of die down, and then another one would start. So I tell people I attended about 3 or 4 seminaries worth of classes before I actually went to seminary. And in the early 80s, I moved to Southern California to pastor a church in Redondo Beach. I didn't know Mike at that time, but he was living down there, having moved down from the Bay Area of Northern California to attend the Bellflower Seminary, CMBI, where Brother Roy Reed was pastor and president. Brother I.K. Cross was his right-hand man.
I know
And
him.
other good teachers. And they made sure that that seminary was on the kind of high level that you talked about, Little Rock. They were very well respected men. They demanded a lot from the other instructors and the students, of course. And so Mike and I both attended there during the 80s, which, did I hear right? That's about the time you two were attending Little Rock.
Yeah, 87 when we started together.
87 to, and then we graduated 91 with our bachelor's.
Yeah, I was 92.
A few years after us then. But we connected with some really great men. And of course, Roy Reed grew up in California. And he grew up here in the Central Valley where I live, just south of me. He grew up. And then he went back to Little Rock and then came back here to Bellflower after some years. Do either of you know who L.D. Perdue is? Doug Perdue.
I've heard the name, but I don't know that I've ever met him.
Okay, he's my wife's uncle. He died
Okay.
several years ago. But I always said about Doug Perdue, if you looked up ABA in the dictionary, his picture would be there because he was a lifelong ABA man.
Right.
He grew up in California, just right down the road from where I live right now. And he surrendered to preach at the same time as a man named Lester McAllister and Roy Reed. And they all went back to Little Rock together as teenage boys.
Mhm.
Then after they graduated, they pastored a few churches in Arkansas. And then Doug Perdue eventually came back out here and pastored all over Oregon and California. And his last several years of his life, he was a member here where I'm pastor, and I conducted his funeral. But he was always on the History and Archives Committee,
Mhm.
historical work, and he's printed several historical books of Missionary Baptists on the West Coast and other historical books. So we have a deep connection to some of the people that were deeply connected to the Little Rock School.
Yes, sir.
Brother Rick, I heard that Brother Perdue's blood type was ABA.
No, that's good. That's good. Now, Eddie Johnson was also very good friends with Dr. Don Price.
Yes.
And
My
Dr.
parents, as a matter of fact, my parents knew Brother Price and his future wife, Pat, in Shawnee, Oklahoma. My parents were members of Liberty Missionary Baptist Church in Shawnee, Oklahoma back in the 50s. And that's where Dr. Don Price grew up. That's where Paul Magnus grew up. And they were all good friends, really, until the time of my parents' death. They kept up with one another very well. So
the church I pastor now is named Liberty Missionary Baptist Church, and I was born in Ada, Oklahoma.
Okay.
Came to California as a baby, but I still claim to be an Okie.
There you go.
Yeah.
Boomer Sooner.
I'm from where I'm at. I literally pastor in the town I grew up in, so I
So
graduated.
are both of you are currently pastoring churches?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Where at?
Go ahead,
I'm
Tim.
Landmark, Jacksonville, Arkansas, of course.
I'm pastoring Sulphur Springs Missionary Baptist Church in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
My wife and I just made a cross-country road trip to Virginia for a family reunion, which naturally we took Interstate 40 through
Right.
Little Rock, and so we were within a few miles of both of you, I guess, at some
Yes,
point.
sir.
You
But
were.
I think that was one of those days. Our main goal was how many miles can we put behind us?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
So
Now,
we
you
did
get on I-40, you can put a lot of miles behind you in one day.
Yes, you can. I was amazed at some of the. I didn't think my wife and I were up to 700-800 mile days, but we were, especially when some of those roads allowed you to go 80 or 85 miles an
Yes,
hour.
Yeah.
But so, where were both of you born?
I was born in North Little Rock, Arkansas. I was actually I think I was the first child born in 1962 when they built the hospital. So I know every anniversary they have is my birthday. So that's the only, I went to the hospital once, emergency room with a grandchild, and they tried to stop me. And I said, I own the hospital. And, but they didn't know who I was. And when I told them later, when the security guards came to interview me to see what I was doing, because my grandchild was receiving her care by then, because you cognitively created a disturbance in their mind and they didn't know who I was. But then I told them, I said, well, I was the first baby born here and I'm a Baptist. It's the Baptist Memorial Hospital. So told them I own the place and don't apologize for being the first child they brought into the world. So they got a laugh and finally found out I was harmless. But again, I'm only where I'm at. I've never been anywhere. So
One thing I'd never describe you as harmless, but
thank you.
I was born in Hobbs, New Mexico, born and raised in Hobbs, New Mexico, and Parents were members of First Missionary Baptist Church there. I was raised in that church and was a member there until really I left and came to Little Rock to go to the seminary in the early 80s for music. Went back there as a music and youth director to my home church in the mid 80s. And after I'd been there 2 years was when I began to think that I was called to preach. And like I said, came back to Little Rock to go to the seminary in 87.
Why New Mexico? I know so few people who usually it's a military reason or something like that they're in New Mexico.
My dad followed a job there. My folks are both from Oklahoma, from Wilika, Oklahoma, and my dad was in pipeline, and he left. They were living in Shawnee. He left Shawnee and went down to Louisiana, to Opelousas, Louisiana, to work for Service Pipeline. And that was in 59, and they stayed there for a year. And my dad always said, the Lord sent me to Louisiana to live there for 1 year just to teach me to never go back there again. And so Mid-America Pipeline opened up in 1960, and he was one of the first people hired to work there. And he went to work at the terminal. It's actually about halfway between Hobbs, New Mexico and Seminole, Texas. And so that's where they were. I was born in 62. And so my parents stayed there the rest of their lives. He retired with Mid-America Pipeline. So that's how he ended up there.
And we are the same age, born the same year. So
From the time both of you started preaching until now, you've always been connected with the ABA work?
yes.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any fellowship or connections with like anyone from the BMA or independent missionary Baptist churches?
Through my brother, I have had some connection with some of the churches I think they call themselves the Global Independent Baptist Fellowship. It's some churches that left the BBFI over some issues. Really, most of these churches, really good churches in the GIBF. They're local church only. They are very much landmark missionary, the landmark in their teaching. And my brother had gone into that movement, gone into churches that movement, and I kind of got acquainted. I've kind of become acquainted with some of the preachers in that association or in that fellowship, I guess you would say.
I don't know anyone.
But you're so harmless.
It's
I
harmless.
later where I'm at, and
When he meets someone, they're a stranger for maybe 2 minutes, and when he's done, they're not strangers anymore.
well, we're not friends either.
Uh,
It's just too exhausting, because
yes.
I don't have the opportunity to engage people very often. So
I've watched some of your videos, Brother Carter, and either you have to study extra hard to remember things, or you have a photographic memory. And I'm just curious, do you have a photographic memory?
well, you're being polite to find a nice category for my brain, but it's inert knowledge, I guess. And I spent most of my life since I was 23 as a consultant, trained years ago by DuPont. And we had no computers in any of the companies. There was no such thing as that. So most of what we did, we had to get the core knowledge and then iterate and then reiterate. So one of the things we were trained in was developing expertise, I think they called it, but it was mainly reinforcing the learning, because what Eddie don't tell you is we collaborate on every video before I ever make one. I have to call him and ask him. But as far as the photographic memory, I think it's called inert knowledge. Like I could write a formula on the board from calculus, but it doesn't mean I understand everything about it. So in that way, it's goes back to Randy Murray, who told us early in seminary to start carrying our Greek New Testament. And then one of the things I had to learn to do, because I never had time, but no one does, but when I would leave the school, I'd go straight into the factory. The shift would start at 3. I may be there to 3:30 and then be back at school at 7:30. So there was never any textbook time or anything. So I took the vocabulary, the ones most often used, and then I would constantly look at the text. And then, as Dr. Murray said, don't let what you don't know throw you from what you do. So once I learned how many words I already knew, and then I would just look at it, find a relationship in the text, for example, and then I would just write it out, because he told us to start freehanding as soon as possible and reading as soon. We were carrying our Greek text in the seminary before
Right.
we ever.
Well,
Now, I
and
don't
it
know what you
wasn't
call it.
just it wasn't just Brother Murray. All of our teachers, there was a really systematically structured presentation, systematically structured way of study that they presented the text and presented the coursework. And we just didn't have any other choice. At least I didn't think there was any other choice but to learn it. There wasn't any other choice to do. So
Yeah, that's true. Our environment, like my work background and then the school's environment it wasn't coercive. It was high expectations.
Very high.
And they literally wanted us to have value for and we learned the history there, how men went there without anything and built a school and did without and things like that. So even me working 7 days a week was not really the hardship that they experienced. And then back to what I'd learned how to learn. And so I don't study much as far as how long would it take. So I'll just look at the text and then I word it out, because there's not really that much we're unfamiliar with. Because in systematic theology, well, every teacher taught as if they were the only teacher there.
right,
And
right.
whether it was survey, whether it was
And we were accountable to them as if they were the only teacher there.
well, even in evangelism by Dr. Don Price, when you wrote out the text by memory, the English text, the punctuation was part of that. So I don't know what you call it. I don't know if it's just heavily ingrained, I suppose. But
Well, we were expected to learn it, or we were going to fall behind. And it was just one of those things where that kind of instruction with that kind of expectation, there was nothing else to do but learn it, to the point that what else would we do but begin to use it?
and we were old when we started. We were both 25.
That's true. Yeah.
So
So
like
while
if
we're
I
on
were
this-
18, yeah,
while
if
we're
I
on
was
this-
18, I wouldn't have done it.
Go ahead. While we're on this particular subject, since both of you are at a high level of Greek expertise, what are your views of the various Greek manuscript traditions? The Textus Receptus or the majority?
Oh,
text,
yes, that's right. Yes. Yeah, well, and
tradition?
and in the class I'm in, we agreed to use FHA Scribner's Textus Receptus, to use the English Bible, King James. We have people in my class that have been a member of Landmark over 70 years. And I taught them how to use it to show where the English text, like believe and believing, which most people didn't notice it in their King James Bible. They wouldn't notice capital Spirit, lowercase Spirit in John 3. What is that? 3:8, 3:6.
Right.
No, 3:6. Well, there was just things that I was using, so we agreed to not change anything. But as far as what text we were trained in, we were trained
That's
in
the UBS.
all of them, actually. The Nestle Aland and
Right.
all of the
So
critical
So based
text.
the
on
text, the text we used at school was the UBS, United Bible Society's text.
Okay.
And I used that one in my translation for a long time, until I started to come across some issues within that text, that the grammar just was not working. And that's what sent me into a study of the different text families. And I had never even thought about any of that coming out of school. And I got to studying it more and more. And I became convinced, this is just my conviction, that I would prefer to go with the text that was handed down through the people of truth down through the years, which was the Textus Receptus, rather than go with the text that had been protected by the Catholic Church, which was the Nestle Aland UBS text. And I'm not to say that I'm not in the camp like some are, where if you don't have the right text and the right Bible and the right translation, that you can't lead someone to the Lord. That's just silly. But but if I'm going to be as close as I can to the text that came from the apostles, that they wrote or that they dictated to someone else, I was convinced that it was going to be the Textus Receptus, and so that's the one that I have been using now for 30 years or so.
Well, now
President-
my preference for FHA Scrivener has to do with the Baptist in 1850, who catalyzed Cambridge to improve their published King James Bible.
Right.
So much did they improve it that he included indices and references because he knew the Baptist would be reviewing the Cambridge edition when he republished it. And I was so impressed that it was, I believe it was Spurgeon and Graves were two of the instrumental people in insisting that what was produced by Cambridge be improved and suitable since it was in the public domain. And someone asked me why Baptists would be the ones that do that. And I said, because they use it for the rule of faith and practice.
Wow.
So since they were going through it line by line and studying it, they noticed, as it was only the Baptists who taught me, noticed where it says John Baptist, not John the Baptist, which is still in some of them. And then when I read the history, which is in a book we have, Dr. Penn, by whose authority? It's a PDF. In there, you'll learn that, what is it called? Logos.com.
Right.
They couldn't find a King James Bible to publish on their website. There was one didn't exist in a standard form. So they went with FHA Scrivener's edition that had been corrected. And I mean corrected, meaning things were just totally inappropriate in their presentation of the English Bible. So I was thoroughly impressed with people being that familiar with an English Bible to be able to so pressure a university, Cambridge University, that they went back and corrected it. He even developed his own TR based on the variances he noticed between the, Bezas and what's that other one? Beza was 1598. Anyway.
Right. Beza, and then I'm trying to remember the one before him, and it's not coming to me off the top of my head.
Well, the thing is, that was what I was really struck. I was so surprised because of Baptist anyway, that I found them instrumental in overriding or I guess catalyzing a university called Cambridge to make it. I don't run across that many people that would be so familiar with a text that they could see the errors by a university that would publish it. And of course, Cambridge wasn't using it for the rule of faith and practice. It was a product they were distributing. So like I say of the Baptists, they walked on the Trail of Tears with my family, and they collaborated with the political scientists who framed this country's documents. So I was really looking for those people. And,
Do you ever read or reference other English translations besides the King James?
Does who?
Do you ever read or reference for your own benefit or even in public English translations other than King James?
Well, I'll let Eddie answer because I can't read like normal people. So.
Well, I do occasionally look at other translations just to compare. If there is consistency in the texts, because the King James is the only published translation now that I'm aware of that is translated from the Textus Receptus. The other published translations all come from usually the what they call a majority text or the UBS or something like that. But there are plenty of verses that are consistent in both. And occasionally I will look at another translation just to see how they translated it, or some of the wording that they use, something like that. I seldom, as a matter of fact, I don't reference them when I'm preaching. I preach out of the King James. I will, if I'm going to reference a translation, I reference my own. And that is just to try to clarify what it is that we're trying to communicate from the text itself.
Yeah, make it clear. We were trained in the seminary to, when you go to a church to pastor, you carry a large black Bible, King James with the gold trim. And then when you explain something, you explain it of course, in English, you don't get up and say agorazomai. You get up and say the meaning and make it intelligible. And we were very much, it was a different time because we were there to communicate the message, not distract the audience, and
Right.
told how to dress, which I had no problem with any of it, because when I was working even long ago in that factory, anyone in management at one time, I remember they had to wear a tie so the structure was there, but I don't know I can't explain how I don't read other things. I was a process control specialist, so we eliminate variables. And so our class had to agree before we started that they would use their King James English, which is what we collaborated to do. And then we would use, could I give them the interlinear, FHA Scribner's interlinear, so they can read the history? And then we go from there. But
Just out of curiosity, before we move on to other things, don't want to dwell on this too long, but when I was a kid in the Central Valley of California was populated by Southerners, the Dust Bowl people, the Depression people. So a lot from Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri, and so forth, Texas. And in the 30s and 40s, and World War II brought a lot of them out here. And so when I was a kid growing up, the Schofield King James Version was really popular, and I had one early on, even used it a fair amount. Is it still, it doesn't seem to be popular out here anymore. Is it still used back there?
With is in my experience, if you have people older than I am, you still have a lot of popularity with the Schofield. I still see that quite a bit with older folks. I don't see it so much with the younger ones anymore.
But it's still the Bible, to my knowledge, that must be cited in all of the curriculum produced by Bogart Press. Yeah, King James, Schofield, whatever edition it was. And I remember that because we had to be in a class where we had to write a sample Sunday school lesson, and one of the criteria was still using that standard at that time. So I guess we didn't use the notes, we just used the text. And in evangelism class, those were the texts we memorized that we had to write down, which was fascinating.
Right.
Anyway, because I've learned trying to take it exactly as it is. That took some time to chisel that out, I suppose. Yeah. So
after a while, though, I don't look at Bible notes at all. Hardly. I'm getting my information from the text itself, from the context, as we're looking at the original language and the translation and making it come together. I have plenty to preach from that without going to someone else's notes like that.
Have you guys decided to take some of your notes and more or less kind of write out your own commentary on any given book? The notes that you've collected from the text, you jot those down, you preach them. Have you put them in a concentrated form, like say the Gospel of John or something, in terms of writing your own commentary?
Not yet, but we've talked about that.
Yeah, we both will. We're finishing a project now under the purview of our systematic theological professor, theologian, Dr. John Owen. We've asked him to edit it. It's Bible theology, not systematic theology, but Bible theology. And it's so succinct that it's somewhat elusive. But we agreed that once this project's done, that we'd go through all the books, for example, which we both taught through the books several times where we pastored over the years. And we both have thrown away translations that just, anyway, we can't change our ignorance. We can just become more aware of it.
And move on from it, hopefully.
Yeah, we can start knowing how to avoid it. But yes,
Right.
we'll be doing more, becoming more production oriented. We'll be getting more products out.
Let me segue off that a little bit. Do each of you have a favorite Bible book?
I could just pick any one, Genesis to Revelation. to be honest.
Whichever one you're preaching
now, as
on.
far as getting my attention, here just recently, the book of Ephesians has had my attention a lot. I call the book of Ephesians Paul's masterpiece on the church. And you have just, I mean, from verse 1 all the way through, it is all about the New Testament church, Jesus being the head, we being the body, Jesus being the groom, we being the bride, Jesus being the cornerstone, the capstone, we being the living stones built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets. And it's just the book itself is just the book for what is a New Testament church.
Are you
And
saying,
so
are you saying
has
if you
had-
study Ephesians, you can't be universal church if you study it properly?
Well, you wouldn't want to be anyway. I don't get what anybody's saying.
I don't know how in the world anybody could come to that conclusion by from studying Ephesians or any of the other church epistles.
Brother Carter, you have a favorite book?
Well, yes, since we're speaking sentimentally, I suppose he's speaking professionally, but I bought my first Bible when I was 8 years old, and no, I was 10, and I had to borrow $1.25 because my allowance wasn't enough. And the red letters when I was a child, and then John's Gospel, and that was my first translation I made when I was 10, and I gave it to my father. Of course, he was always worried about me because he thought something was wrong with me to spend my allowance on a Bible and then to translate. And so I gave it to him, and I just found out a year ago that he had kept it all these years. And,
Wow.
But I don't know what it is. It's just that was the text the pastor was preaching out of John's Gospel. Of course, we had been in Bible school 2 weeks every day when we were, all the moms were there, all day long activity, and we were always immersed there in that church with the scriptures. But the Bible and the book of John seemed to be, well, I know when they told me Christ died for me, they couldn't stop me from being baptized. And of course, the pastor would come to your home and meet with your parents and with you. And it was much more, they really wanted to be assured of what we were assured of and make sure what we were persuaded of. So it was quite remarkable, but that's a lot to think about. It was
Can't do much better than Ephesians and John, that's for sure. Do you have a favorite verse, kind of a theme verse, or one that just you cling to more than others?
Not with me. I think of there's so many verses that come to mind as I'm dealing with different things throughout the day. I don't know that I don't know that I could say that I have a favorite verse. I like all of them.
Good answer. It's good when you can say a lot without saying anything.
That's right.
I've always admired the pastor.
You taught me that.
Yes.
Yes, but he can sing though. But he can sing.
He is a
I can
singing
sing it
preacher.
too. That's
Yeah,
right.
as the world comes to an end, you want to be near Eddie because he'll be the one placating us. Well, the thing too about John, and he'll tell you, is we were encouraged very early in the school to begin using the letters of John for our Greek word practices and studies. So truthfully, a lot of the work that we do, and even I'll put on the videos, are things we had worked on in the past. And it may look like something remarkable, but it's about efficiency and time, getting that out there quickly. And the students that we have that I know of that have started writing it, they're really starting to connect with it. That was something Dr. Murray was big on, the writing, especially when Hebrew, write it out, do it. We'd write it out, conjugate it, decline the nouns, conjugate the verbs, then do the syntax. And we'd be up on the board writing, because the first time I was in the school and one of the professors went up and started writing Greek on the board, I thought I was in the wrong place. I thought we'd be there like architect lecture, appreciation or something, but they were literally using it. And I missed the first week in Hebrew. Remember that?
I do remember that. I
Yeah,
thought,
I
I
came
thought
in
to
and-
myself, you'll never get caught up.
Well, they said there's no such thing as purgatory, but I had to get out of, I was in something because I couldn't overcome missing that week. And somehow it turned around and something Eddie won't say. Do you mind if I bring it up?
If I knew what it was, I could say yes or no, but since I
He
don't,
sings, but he's not psychic. So he was a Missionary Baptist Student of the Year.
Oh.
And if something happens to him and he dies, I will tell people I was the runner-up. So no one has a record of that. But truthfully, we had to laugh through school or we would just have been overwhelmed because we had students, if you remember, sometimes students, because they would work and go to school, it was too daunting for some. But I do think it was right when they said it was an advantage being older. I know 25 is not old now, but
it
then
was
being older because
having been through some schooling before and being ready for that kind of assault on the mind, that kind of, I mean, 4 years after we started, we've talked about this. We didn't think the same. We didn't approach things the same because of the kind of academics and because of the kind of expectations. I mean,
that's a different culture too. I mean,
it is,
you got to be a little, I don't know what you call it today.
but it was established by Dr. Ben M. Bogard and Dr. J. Lewis Guthrie at the Missionary Baptist Seminary,
Yeah.
that they wanted to teach and equip students to study the Bible for themselves so that they could go out and start producing their own product rather than just regurgitating what they learned at seminary.
Mhm.
And those expectations continued through the instructors and the staff there at the seminary when we were there. And that, like I said, we just came out thinking differently. Our minds were transformed in so many different ways because of the experience of learning. And Tim and I were blessed. It wasn't just us. There were 3 or 4 other guys that we all kind of hung around with that had kind of the same convictions.
Mhm.
I don't know that the rest of the guys, they didn't have the passion for the languages that we did, but they had the same convictions about doing things the right way, studying the Bible, learning to study the Bible for yourself, which was why we were there.
Yeah, that ethic
And that was
very
helpful.
high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was very helpful to keep us all centered and keep us from flying apart at the seams.
Mhm. Mhm. Let me transition to another subject, if you don't mind, and I'll transition by telling a Brother Bogard story. He came to California in the early 40s, and there was a pastor by the name of Jesse Scott who had just moved out from Arkansas, was pastoring a little church in southern end of the Central Valley. And Brother Bogard preached for that church, and they were sitting at breakfast at one of the ladies of the church fixed him breakfast. And Brother Bogard and Jesse Scott were sitting at the table drinking coffee and waiting for breakfast. She's over at the stove cooking, and she says, Brother Bogard, I'd like to know who the 2 witnesses are.
That's good.
And the way Jesse Scott he could tell a story like this. You could draw a picture. He said, Brother Bogard just sat there real quiet for a few seconds, picked up his cup of coffee and took a long, slow sip of coffee, set it down and said, Sister Nelson, I'd like to know that myself. So regarding not the 2 witnesses, but regarding the prophetic scriptures and the condition of the world and so forth, do you have a sense of where we are maybe toward the return of Christ and all the events leading up to it?
I'm ready whenever you want.
I know that's a real broad.
That it is, I've lived, I was raised by missionary Baptists. And so being around my parents, and my dad was a friend to preachers all throughout the Southwest Association. Now they call it Southwest Association in West Texas and Eastern New Mexico. And I've always been raised expecting Jesus' return to be imminent. And I continue to subscribe to that. Are we close? Certainly we're closer now than we were then. You know, to try to put a time frame on it. I mean, put it to you this way: some folks will say, "Well, it just can't get any worse," and I say, "Yeah, it can.
Yeah.
It can get a lot worse." So I don't know. All I know is this, and this is something that Tim and I have talked about a lot. I'm not nearly as concerned about when the rapture is going to be. We know that it's going to happen. I'm more concerned about how many people we can take with us.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was spoken of quite often,
You know,
the evangelistic side. Now, my conjecture, do you mind?
no, I don't mind at all. I'd like to hear it.
Well, I only research data. I don't have an opinion anymore because I was raised with a doctrine of the rapture that no longer exists. We were taught as children that we would never be here if we had a one world government, certainly not be here in 91 when George Bush announced a new world order. We wouldn't be here when 2000 Y2K came. We wouldn't be here when a global war on terror. We were always told that we're the only reason there's such a great world as it is now because we're here, and that we're going to be gone, and then it's going to go to somewhere Hades in a handbasket. So I keep asking all my friends now, I said, what happened to that doctrine you taught? Because they totally abandoned it. They don't even want to talk about it anymore. And so I had to make this huge adjustment to the rapture doctrine. As I asked pre, mid, and post, I said, who said it was about the tribulation? Because when I was taught, we'd go to church that night and the preacher would say, you may not get home. So that was a good thing to develop anxiety in a child that had a lot of issues. I had a lot of nice bangs. I would stay behind them. I didn't speak. Even in fourth grade, I had yet to speak. So I would go home thinking any minute.
And you've been making up for it ever since.
Yes. And I've had incidents where something would happen and I would still have that early branding on my brain that, well, this is it. But now, before I became cynical and noticed that the world's going to Hades in a handbasket with us here. We were taught we're the difference, we're the light, we're the salt, we're the reason why we have any law and order, we're the reason why we have anything being restrained, but we would be gone any minute. So that imminence, no, I don't hold that notion. And then my research on the chronographer Ussher and the mathematician Newton, they had the what was it? 2060 was Newton. Now, he wasn't predicting the day, he was predicting the year. And then, of course, Ussher said 1996, to be exactly 6,000 years from 4004. He also believed a doctrine in Latin, but it meant the day, the exact day, October 23rd. But if you notice the pattern, which I did observe the pattern, that 80 years from 1948 was 2028. And you notice that's a minus 32 years back to 1996 and a plus 32 years to 2060. And none of that was my data. That was a mathematician, theologian, Newton, and a theologian who worked on chronologies that we still, I think it's credible, his chronologies. Now, the end of the age, I don't know, but I just noticed that one was 32 minus, one was 32 plus. There was symmetry there. I noticed that's the same year of Christ's arrival, 32 AD. I have noticed that there is no implication of imminence that I was trained in, meaning that we've got to go first, then everything falls apart. Now I've studied Dr. Graves, and he's more than convinced that there's things that will have to happen in the future. He was once, I think, among people ridiculed for believing Israel will be regathered literally. And now no one ridicules that. He was believed a future temple, things would have to be in place and in order. So when you start doing that, it really brings it back down to understanding, as I think Dr. Penn once said recently, which I really shouldn't have quoted him, should I? Some man somewhere said that he views it as escalation. I mean, you can learn things from what happened in 70 AD. You can go all the way back, like we learned in Habakkuk, when the Chaldeans went in and punished the southern tribe of Judah. You can see God's pattern with his people and the relationship of that temple being removed. And now he's replaced that temple brick and mortar with the churches, the ecclesias. There is a function, a strategic outpost, if you will, that we function as. That way of worship's gone that they had, and we're instrumental in the future. And as it scale, it's escalating. Same features, same elements, but now it's escalating. So that changed a lot for me when I started realizing the tribulation, the great, rather than just tribulation, like we were trained in seminary about the Great Commission as opposed to the limited one. And of course, that stranger, I don't know who I was referring to, Dr. Penn, had said that it's not really as much as a recycling or repeating as much as it is a scale. And it looks like we're approaching a time where we're in the margin of error now. We are now where, I don't know, again, when I see patterns, I'm not looking for them. I wasn't looking for Newton. I wasn't looking for Usher. Someone told me to check out their numbers, and someone was ridiculing Usher and someone was laughing at Newton. I just wrote the numbers on the board and the pattern fell into place. And I noticed that we're starting to get an eccentric area now where we're starting to see most people's interest. I don't hear the pre-tribbers arguing much anymore with the mid-tribbers like they once did. I don't see people disfellowshipping like I once saw it. None of us saw a global war on terror simultaneously with a global pandemic, simultaneously with the globalization of religion, where even people we considered conservative Baptists were aligning themselves and moving away. The stand away, the apostasy, that stand away is starting to become so prevalent now that I'm seeing people concerned now that we really never, well, like me, I was taught we wouldn't be here. Now, I'm not blaming the people who said it. It was very good for attendance, apparently, because I was just glad to get home alive.
Yes,
And
right.
we could get back there the next week. And but again, that just vanishing act, it wasn't, I don't think it was their intention to void it of any Bible knowledge or relevance to what the churches are doing here. What role are we accomplishing and achieving while we're here? So, yeah, I'm more of a scaled fellow now. I'm looking at implications beyond 70 AD, but implications because of that. And now that we've moved to New Testament worship, and what will the churches be doing? And we know both of us of a book, Mr. Crawford wrote a book, Churches to the Front, I think is the name of it.
T.P. Crawford.
And then you get that from the Baptist history, and at the seminary especially, that we were being called into relevance and significance in world history. And so I'm no longer, I guess, what you call
and this is another broad general question, is there a prevalent view through the seminary in general about pre or post tribulation or imminence, or is it pretty much left up to each instructor and students to decide? Or
well, all of them that wrote papers or wrote something were mid.
Well, that actually has changed a lot in the recent years, and I think that Brother Mark Fortin and Brother Terry Parrish really have been the ones that have done a lot of study on that, and they're pretty much post.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yes.
I grew up.
I didn't say that. I did not say that.
I grew up mid-trib, and looking back, I'm really thankful for it because pre and post are so dominant now. Mid is such a small percentage that in some odd way it gave me freedom to develop my own view, because
Exactly.
And the reason I was mid-trib taught growing up is my pastor taught that he was a seventh trumpet, resurrection, return of Christ man, but he put the seventh trumpet at the middle. And so in my own studies, I now move it toward the end, but I was thankful for that. He really just kind of focused my attention on this. It's a seventh trumpet event. And so I kind of ran with that as a kid into my adulthood and developed my own views.
I've got a question. Years ago, Brother Howard had a paper out of the church. They're called the Landmark Chronicles. And for this one particular issue, he decided to print polar views on the pre-millennialism and post-millennialism. So he chose me to present my view on pre. There's a group of churches in South Carolina who held to the post in Simpsonville. And so he contacted the pastor there, Willard, do you remember his name?
Ramsey.
Willard Ramsey. And so he presented the post. And so he had the front page side by side, our articles. And the idea was then to follow up. So the two of us would follow up with a rebuttal to that other person's view in the following issue. And for some reason, he didn't do that. So I went ahead and printed my rebuttal. But my question is, in your area, or, are you aware of a lot of post-millennials? I know the Southern Baptists were huge on that for a while. Where has that gone? Do you hear much about post-millennialism anymore?
I don't hear anything on post-millennialism. Do you?
No, I've know some reformers, but not directly. But no, I haven't run into anyone that's post millennial. But I don't know. They could be in their academic circle. I don't know. But I'm not around. I'm not aware of it. So
you mentioned, Brother Carter, a minute ago about the standing away.
yes.
What do you see as maybe some of the big issues that are causing that? What are they? What's happening to them? What are they embracing that's causing them to fall away?
Well, I have a phrase. I call it covenant aversion. In Arkansas, we had a Baptist pastor become the governor. His name's Mike Huckabee. He was once a presidential candidate. Now you see him a celebrity, I suppose, in some ways, a contributor on Fox News. But he had successfully implemented something called covenant marriage in Arkansas, and it was supposed to be a response to when the marriage issue between man and woman, and it was also a much more substantial covenant perspective in a marriage, so that it wasn't something someone would just stand away from quickly or walk out of, or could just automatically have it adjudicated without cause. And I went back to check the statistics, and it was 1% to 2% ever availed themselves of it. And then I noticed when I was at Landmark in the 70s, going there when there was an event or dragged there because I was forced to go for something, or was there for some friend of mine, we went there. The church itself was a father sitting there, a mother sitting there, children there. The discipline was different. There was consensus, if you will, in the community. We didn't have, businesses weren't open on Sunday. That was strange. I remember we weren't allowed to go outside until after 12 o'clock. If we would somehow have been obstinate that morning and didn't want to go to church, Dad cured it in one moment by saying, well, then you stay in the house, do chores with your mom in the house until after 12 o'clock. But we wouldn't mow the yard on Sunday. You didn't want anyone to think you missed church. There was no boats behind a trailer. Blue laws were still in effect. So whatever it was that acknowledged the Lord's day, and then people wanting to be in a covenant relationship, I still remember people being there willingly subjected to the discipline by the design of the church, the scripting by the word, the correction by the word. Bogard, I was actually became interested in Missionary Baptist because of 52 Doctrinal Lessons book. And then their willingness to self-examine, self-correct, like fathers didn't want to be known as not disciplining their children, like what we do at Landmark. The fathers take the cup and bread, the husband to the wife, his wife. So we believe in what we call restricted to the faithful members, but the restriction in direct applications from the father. But during the service, it's very formal. It's somewhat like you would describe a wedding, where the men get up and they go to their spouse, they go to their baptized children. They decide if the child's prepared. They're responsible for them examining self-correction and parents correcting the children, man instructing his wife, etc. And then, of course, her influence on the husband. So when I say there's something standing away from, it's probably what was once retaining, which was the focus, because often now I've grown up in the community there. I preach funerals for all types of people. And I always remind them that it's quite a a moment that all of us could be in this building at a funeral home, for example, where we all stopped and paused and pushed the pause button on what we're doing. And I would remind them that I was a child in this community when a store would not be open. And a business actually went out of business because she had a sign that said the day's worth more than the dollar. And people quit going to her store because franchises came in and they just ignored her. And she was Baptist, and there were enough Baptists in the community that if we had shopped there, she would have doubled her sales. So whatever happened, it seemed to be the systemic deconstruction of the structure that was once there, the consensus that was there. We had people as long ago as 20 years ago that would charge everyone, put everyone on trial except themselves for their children's conduct. And I remember there was no such thing as a father wanting someone to think he needed someone else to discipline his child, and vice versa. Parents were quite committed. Now, when I say covenant, I mean that was our covenant that we would engage at the church. And the last time I was at that, before 75, the pastor would still say to people that would come to the church, you know, they would want to know who baptized you. They'd want to know, are you coming here to be part of this covenant community? And that included your time, your talents, your service. I'll never forget any of that. They were always a total, and then the family came because the father came. And I remember, I guess it was my first move. I tried to pastor for 3.5 years, but I didn't know what I was doing. I was just using the Bible and visiting the sick and caring for the community and going to visit people and outreach. So it was very upsetting to some because we had at one time 7 or 8 people. We had so many being baptized that I had to put my foot over the drain because someone there believed the drain should be pulled when you baptize, which I didn't care. I just said we need to have the water actually on because it was going down. We baptized too many and it was upsetting. So whatever was going on, I did notice that once the weight and honor was returned to the ecclesia and the heads of the homes assumed those positions, like where I'm at now, I wouldn't even know what it's like to go there to have men come up and say something silly like the grass needs mowed. Or I wouldn't even know what you're talking about. And certainly we don't have in groups anymore. That's embarrassing because the stand away looks to me like everything about the church has been somehow diminished. A father is the head of a home under the headship of Christ. We still recognize the seating arrangement at the Lord's Supper at Landmark. Mm-hmm. We remind them that the father of Jesus is at the head of the table, Jesus at the right, he's the head of the man's head of the wife, children obey the parents. Because without the seating arrangement and without the table, which I made it clear to them, it's in the ecclesia only, and it's for Christ's consolation and our honor to do it in remembrance of him. Mm-hmm. And all that weights back. So I don't know how else to say it, except that was why people just, because I know places now where it's just turn down the lights and turn up the music. Mm-hmm. Now, again, I'm not belittling them. I'm saying we even have a place called The Venue. They named it that. And I told them years ago that one day, whatever people are calling church will just be a venue center. Right. Where you come in, you've got your social network, you've got your activity, and you've had your community bonding or whatever it is. But it's to the disservice of the people as well as it is to the dishonor of God. So that's my notice. Covenant aversion is children might come into the world, but the family is not a sanctuary. Like we teach at Landmark still, that marriage is a sanctuary for the children, so they won't be unclean, as Paul said, literally using that language of a sanctuary. And so our services, I've had comments about things I may have said before, but the kind of men I'm talking to, I have very little, if what I say would bother a man, we need to know that. We need to know if he has some aversion to stepping in. Like deacons serve there, and we have people I wouldn't even know. They accomplish their work and their task, and like I said, I tell them I don't call them about Greek, Hebrew, apologetics, hermeneutics, systematic theology, or funerals or weddings or sermons or classes or the ordinances. So I said they don't need to call me about, is there somebody who doesn't like the color of something? We don't really even have that. Be honest with you, there's no trivia anymore. There's no silliness. Let's find something to talk about. We once had people ask me if there were people on other planets. Now they don't attend there anymore because I told them. Well, I mean, I wasn't upset with them. It's just I was letting them know I appreciated their curiosity, but that what we were here for had something unique involved. And now looking back, we can see now how it turned into a rap session. It turned into, can you bring up the neatest topic? And did you hear about the last Left Behind series book? And I'll just say, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to add to that was a slow erosion that took place in way too many churches over a lot of years. And some churches, I guess it would come down to the leadership of the pastors in many of those churches that brought those churches back to the Bible, back to the core doctrines, back to what a church is and what it means to be a functioning church. And so I know that there's still churches out there that are struggling with the fringe elements of trying to be relevant, which has caused a lot of the standing away, and that's sad.
But now he won't tell you, but he taught me through his pastor, Glenn Tropp, Dr. Glenn Tropp. And Dr. Glenn Tropp said for preachers, young preachers especially, pastor the people who want a pastor.
Yeah.
Well, if I focus on the sheep I've been entrusted to feed, then it's no effort for me to ignore the ones who aren't there for why I'm there. And to be faithful to my call was, at one time it was a point of contention. It's just, I didn't get it. I was a member there. So I told them me teaching what they taught me would be an honor. And those who wanted to disagree with Landmark can take that up with Landmark, but I wouldn't be in the meeting. And Landmark never showed up to hear out their cause. So we just moved on. It was too easy to know the things we needed to know. As you say, the 5 core things that we focus on is the gospel, salvation by grace, of course. We baptize those who believe it. We then fellowship them into the gospel, our fellowships into that same gospel. Then they're trained to self-examine, self-correct, present themselves Lord's table. Then we have the commission, which is then they're equipped and they go out. So when we put the focus there and did like Glenn Tropp said, I quit. I did that in a company first. We had people that would always say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I said, well, not in my department. I was always resourcing what was working and resourcing what was running. And that's what Glenn Tropp taught us. When you go pastor a church, find the people that are there to be fed, find the people there that want the still water, and then serve them. So that's what we did.
Is Brother Tropp still alive?
No, he passed away here a couple of years ago.
Now, he was a bold voice, though, wasn't he?
He was.
I mean,
he was an independent thinker, and he didn't have any qualms telling you what he thought. And he really didn't care what you thought about him for telling it to him.
Yeah.
I used to get the paper sounding out the word. Brother Rick, did you get that paper as well?
No, I never did. No.
He was one of the main writers.
He started that publication when he was pastoring Grace in Houston, and that was before he came up to Sharon and Benton. And after he had left Grace, they still had him writing articles for that periodical for years and years.
I remember Charles Swilling was another one.
Yes, sir.
Those are the two that come to mind anyway.
Yeah.
Yes. What do you guys, as far as falling away, I would include doctrine. I would include universalism. That seems to be.
I would agree. That's a big one.
Yeah. The problem I experienced was one above that was a social church. And I'm not begrudging the dear people, but they came there and brought whatever they thought, similar to the Lord's Supper in Corinth. They came there to distinguish themselves, to bring their name, which Dr. Johnson here, were both talking earlier about how ironic it was, those that brought their notion of whatever the Lord's Supper was to them. Paul said they didn't come there to eat that, of course, where their names weren't even mentioned. And that was the whole point. They wanted status. We have servants now. We have we have people that are even well-to-do by any worldly standards, but not when they come in ecclesia, there's no distinction. There's no, now that was because some of them with me went all the way back 40 years ago. And when I remember Glenn Perry, deportment and demeanor of a gentleman in the pulpit, Tom Stapleton was there, Dr. William K. Roach, if you ever heard of him.
Mhm.
Now it thundered every Sunday when he preached. I remember sitting there and he was talking just on and on. I thought, Lord, what will you one day, can you do something about how long he preaches? And
Long and hard.
but he was the one that
He
reached
would
my
preach.
father because he was authoritative in his preaching.
Mhm.
And my dad had never, didn't believe he'd be in a church again where there was a manly pastor like a Glenn Tropp, authoritative like a W.K. Roach, or the deportment of a Glenn Perry. So our community, it took some, but most of them could be reminded now, as I taught them there, as Eddie taught me, is that God doesn't really begrudge us for forgetting. It's the expectation to be reminded and to be willing to be reminded and called back and called back. So we're continuous. We eat the Lord's Supper once a month, at Landmark once a month, and we are very adamant about it. We do it in the morning service, and it's I don't know how to say it, but it's very structured, very formal, and visitors have been there, and it seemed like a military funeral, for example. No one gets up and gets one of the guns to do the 21 salute because they don't know what's going on. They don't know what's next. Well, our visitors watch us because there's really nothing else they could do. And when you see trained men get up and do something that no one else knows they're doing, then you see it. One lady was there from a different, let's say, some kind of religion, whatever, and she saw her grandson stand up and go get cup and bread and take it to her great-grandchildren. And she left there weeping, marveling, and curious about what did that mean. And he explained the covenant and what a new covenant church was, and the way of worship that is pleasing to God. And we have people there that want to know that they're bothering to do something that serves God's interest. They're not avoiding that. I asked, well, why would you not want to know that what you're doing is for the interest of someone else? Even if that's an imposition, that would be an honor for a servant to have the imposition on us.
To pick up on that, I just mentioned this the other day when we had the Lord's Supper at Sulphur Springs. When you do it, when a church properly does the Lord's Supper, and there are non-member family members there, it may be one of the greatest conversation starters. Conversation starter for, well, let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about where you stand with Jesus, or let's go back to where you are as far as your conviction of scriptural baptism is concerned. So Lord's Supper is one of the great conversation starters. That's my wife that just passed through behind us.
That's okay. My dog's probably going to bark in a minute anyway. Things like that happen on these videos. So in general, are the churches in Arkansas closed communion, restricted to the members of that church only, or sister church members allowed to participate? Or
well, I'll just share a definition of closed that happened at our church years ago. Was a maneuver, and I don't think it was the intention, but it had a negative externality. But they went to something called an active and inactive role, and the mistake I see looking back was to be active, you just were there once a year, which meant I don't know who kept up with that. So I asked then in 1988, because I was working with a group trying to contact people that had been members and follow up, update the data, where are they, and try to reconnect with them. And it was concerning to me because once a year, what does that have to do with the covenant and us being here? Because Landmark had put in the newspaper as long ago as 1980 that we taught it was restricted to faithful members, and everyone in the community respected because that was self-imposed discipline. Well, some were saying we were closed. I said, well, it's actually more substantial than that word, because that means we're just saying our members only. But no, we're saying the ones that are faithfully engaged in what we're here to do, self-examine, self-correct. And so we had to abandon later because it was, again, it wasn't the intention, but to try to clean up the roll and say who's active and inactive, it was so reduced to where the difference between someone who was on an active role at Landmark and someone who wasn't even a member was just did you drop in one time? And so we had to move away from that and then call them in to come back to the table. But our ordinances were the two things, and the Lord's Supper primarily. But yes, we have most people say they're closed. But now, what does that mean? I don't know as far as the.
That's according to the definition of each individual church.
But they at least have to be a member.
I would say that most churches in Arkansas would subscribe to the ABA doctrinal statement about that.
Yes.
I would say that's what they would say.
Yeah.
Now, what they actually practice, I would have no idea. I don't know anything about the other practices. I only know what we do at Sulphur Springs, and we're the same. We're restricted to the members who are in fellowship with one another regarding the Lord's Supper, and that's how we observe it.
Yeah, when we brought the self-discipline feature back, that really changed everything at Landmark. I mean, everything got back on board. So
when someone comes to join your church from another church, in what ways do you examine their testimony and baptism on how you received them? How carefully
y'all do that?
Go ahead, tell him how we do it.
Well, since y'all are the ones who do it, why don't you?
Excuse me. Well, now at Landmark, for example, we had someone return. It's Stanley Creasy, the late Stanley Creasy. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He was the pastor for 50 years, I guess. His wife just returned. She had once been a member of Landmark, so she returned. Of course, we know her, and then we asked her formally of the church from which she was intending to move her letter at that time. So we interviewed her, of course, but everyone flocked her and knew her, and she even attended our seminary. So that was different. But now we've never, I'll just say it, I suppose, we haven't received a letter and don't receive letters, let's say, from convention systems. We don't receive letters from someone who can't explain, like I said, just the 5 core. But now what we do is we interview them. If they have interest in fellowshipping with us, they can demonstrate that first before I recommend them for election by the body, because we have a formal election, which is my recommendation when we convene. And until I make that recommendation on their behalf, which is a trust by the church for me, because I said if there is a gatekeeper, I'll be honored to do that part. And then we've even elected people, again, who returned. We had one who was in Alaska, came back after 30 years. We had a man who came back 13 years out. He heard about the Lord's Supper. He heard his wife was sometimes sitting there without him, and he marched in the door and got cup and bread and told me, I'm not getting this for me, I'm getting this for her. And I said, well, as long as you know that we both know you're doing what's right by going and handing that to your wife. And it was some time before he was brought back into the fellowship, though, because we didn't want to just have an event in a moment. And like, especially we interview children, interview their parents. We've had 2 families where 15 years later, their child came down front as an adult, but the parents were concerned when they were children, and they would ask me, do they understand? I said, well, do we understand? Do we know we're raising them and continuing? I said, you're not going anywhere, are you? They said, of course not. I said, well, we baptize at Landmark. We, the Landmark Baptist Church, baptize, and we attach them to the body, and we all take them as our disciple. As I say from the pulpit often, if you don't enjoy or like us speaking to your children as though they're ours, it's because you don't speak to them as though they're yours. So we get real personal and direct on the front end. So if there's an aversion, we find out quickly, and then I don't recommend an election after that. And that way we don't have this, what do you call it? Just revolving door where someone comes in, we just barely get their name down, we never see them again, because it's a disservice to them to have a low expectation, a low threshold. Because as I say, when I came to Landmark, if they had done a background check, I wouldn't have been surprised. That's how thorough they were. Who baptized you? What was the church? What they teach at that time? And even what year it was, because they knew things historically that I would not have known. And I was honored that they cared enough about me and their church to make the membership mean something. And it does. And when they explain that, the Lord's Supper especially, because if we have someone, we don't have church problems, that's just a euphemism. It's a nice way of saying nothing. So we identify the head of that house, and we're working with 2 men now. One man, we're working with him directly and immediately. And we want to restore him to the table fellowship first and want him to take responsibility for his own. So I guess that's how we receive people, but we haven't had a letter. And if it's from the same faith, we want to know what's going on that would make you, because if it's convenience, we don't encourage that at all. We've had people be 15 minutes away, but after I talk with them and ask them, how did you resolve this conflict or difference? And most of the time they haven't heard of that before. I said, well, it would really be good for your church and you to go through that discipline, that exercise, and see what your relationship is. Now, when they can't work things out, then they won't be recommended for election until which time they've satisfied me that they have an interest in the covenant at Landmark. Because if we get in a hurry, we go backwards. And I've worked with people who would run backwards rather than walk forward. And I don't blame them. It's just some type of psychopathy. I can't really diagnose it beyond that. So go ahead, Dr. Johnson.
Oh, the way that it's not a structured situation, but it pretty much comes out the same way as what they do at Landmark. People are visiting, and we just kind of try to get to know them before we even talk about church membership. I don't do a whole lot of chasing of people who are coming from other churches. I just preach the gospel, and if they want to talk about church membership, we'll sit down and talk about church membership. And a lot of times it's several weeks of us getting to know them getting to know us. And then when they do express the desire to join, then I sit down with them and we start off where we start off with core doctrines. We start off with their profession of faith, and then where they were baptized, what church baptized them, things of that nature, and find out how that we can be comfortable bringing them into the congregation.
Well, it sounds like you both, I think Mike's church in Missoula and here in Modesto, California, we do the same thing. We have the general attitude that you two have of taking care of things on the front end. You save a whole lot of problems later on.
It certainly does.
Especially for them.
On another spectrum, we're also aware that in Arkansas, in the Little Rock area, there are what I call a nest of vipers or a pack of wolves, by Ephesians 20.
If you're looking at us when you say that, I don't have a problem with it, but I'm trying to find out how to wrestle you through this Zoom thingy. But go ahead. I think you have something else in mind, but I'm hoping you do. So
they are pawning themselves off as missionary Baptists, as landmarkers, but they believe in baptismal regeneration. They do not believe in eternal security. Basically works for salvation. And it's unfortunate that they are calling themselves missionary or going by that name, because they're not landmarkers by any stretch. I don't know if you've heard of one of the churches in Traskwood, Guiding Light, the Guiding Light Church.
I have not heard of them.
I've heard of them now. I'm texting it to myself.
Yeah.
No, I'll make a note, really.
Yeah.
No, I'm not familiar with any churches that in the Central Arkansas area that would call themselves missionary Baptists, but would hold those odd beliefs. Now, I've only been back in Central Arkansas now for 4 years. I was 24 years in Amarillo pastoring Antioch, the missionary Baptist church there. So there's a lot of things that have changed in those years that I was outside of Arkansas. And I'm not familiar with that a bit. I couldn't tell you anything about that.
Well, now I'm aware of the universalism, which again, I've seen that become more of a social assertion, like placating someone. And of course, I was talking to Eddie about it, but I'm doing research now on there's 2 groups. You've ever heard of Free Grace or Grace Evangelical Society? Well, they have a church tracker, and then the ABA has a church tracker, which means they have standards. So when I talk to my friends who say they're free grace or that they're universal or whatever, I say, well, why do you have a church tracker? They have a rationale for a standard to meet. And as one of our upcoming projects is to notice that people are comparing their church with another church, but are you comparing it with the scriptures? For example, people love to compare their Calvinism by telling you how bad Arminianism is, or how bad Lutheranism is, or Molinism, or whatever Pelagianism is, but they don't want to tell you the results of evaluating their construct in light of the scripture. Well, as soon as you go down the road, and I admire this, as soon as someone like the free grace churches, they call themselves, and I consider myself absolutely free grace as far as the free gift of God. Mm-hmm. But to then see that they make an effort to try to keep out works and then not notice that what we already have by design in the Lord's church, it's difficult to suppose someone would come by the gospel of grace, being persuaded by that message, and then want to be baptized and of their own volition and cause themselves by that persuasion to come into this fellowship, which, understanding now you're here to be as we are under the authority of Christ, under the instructions of this scripture, and then to see them fellowship with us and then grow to self-examine, self-correct, eat the Lord's Supper. It seemed that everything's already there. And even like in the ABA, we have a church tracker, which means we have certain things we expect you to believe. Well, we do too, but we also practice, say, believe and practice, faith and practice. So the upcoming work I'm working on is, you really can't say you have a standard without implying that, well, now let's evaluate that. And that's what I'm wanting to do, because I'm very happy to be friends with Bible Baptist, free grace churches, whatever they want to be. But I don't see the contradiction that some have slandered landmark churches for baptism, for example, or membership, for example, or Lord's Supper, for example, and yet they almost not really betray themselves, but they kind of show an inconsistency when they say we have a standard that we want to be able to publicize which churches we would say are a good church to attend. Well, that attempt to track a church or have a register of them, as you were saying, there's a nest of some you're aware of that are teaching things in the name of Missionary Baptist. Well, it would be good, to have that, but then to notice that in the church itself, it's self-perpetuating. It's designed to purge out like we do. The leaven we purge out isn't from the cracker, because we've got the cracker. We got it with no leaven, a little bread fragment. But the leaven we purge out is the hypocrisy, the pretense. As you were saying, you just said it when you said they present themselves as one thing and they're teaching another thing. Right. Well, that's why I said when I was approached by people of the Free Grace or the Grace Evangelical Society, I have great admiration for their support for local churches, and they want to identify you. Okay, but now let's logically then evaluate what it is about your fellowship that is compared to the scriptures that would warrant us coming up with mechanisms and devices and communication, which is fine. It's just we have an inherent intrinsic, because I haven't found the ecclesia to be lacking in its design or its, it's right. It's not just life in Christ. You thrive in that ecclesia. And when you mentioned there's people doing it, we have, like I said, the social church really wants the pressure. They pressure people with their threat of money, whatever that is, or threat of influence, whatever that, just like in the book of Acts, they would stir up people. Well, then they want you to concede that, well, all the saved are something. Well, whatever that assertion is, it's a result of having to say it, not because there's any veracity in any actual New Testament practice. It just seems to be more of a, like, if you'll say it, then you can be accepted, whatever that means, which I wouldn't know why New Testament church would want to be accepted. Like I said, I knew people that reloaded ammo, but I never really felt pressured as someone who worked for the leading manufacturer of ammunition in the entire world. And, I never went home from the factory and said, oh, let me go ask Bub over here who just blew up his shotgun with his, I treat whatever this error is, it's as clumsy as somebody trying to, I told people your uncle can pull your tooth, but it doesn't make him a dentist.
Mhm.
whatever you're saying. Apparently, the credibility, which I was telling him earlier, but at Fayetteville, Arkansas, at the University of Arkansas, I was in the Pre-Theological Association. The first thing they told us is there was no pre-theology like pre-med or pre-law. And they were saying that in the future, they foresaw churches losing their credibility. Well, we've lost the credibility, accreditation type thinking,
Mhm.
where no one knows what to even check for or to ask for. It's all now vague. It's all ambiguous. It's all, well, we have a good time while we're there. It's a good fellowship. And I appreciate that sense of community and that personal experience, but I'm not sure how that's serving the interest of the one that we called out for,
Mhm.
because I have people that want to know, as I was talking to Eddie, they want to know that what they're doing is what God would want them to do, that's pleasing to Him. This worship was pleasing. This gathering at His table was pleasing to Him, just as important as baptism. We talked earlier, we say baptism's 100% where you can't be a member, and yet you can be indifferent toward the
Right.
Lord's table. You can be indifferent towards your responsibility as the head of the house. You don't self-examine, self-correct, which that's a contradiction. So I'm trying to influence some people with their concession that there's a standard. And once you make that concession, then you've opened the opportunity for me and anyone else who wants to say, well, what were they doing in the first 3 centuries? What were they doing all through history? And well, they were becoming a gazing stock for Christ, and coming out through baptism triggered persecution when they did it, and their allegiance was to Christ, and they did that in a demonstrable way. And but I had no idea people were teaching baptismal regeneration and
Under
whatever
the
else.
guise of missionary Baptists, that's a new one on me.
Because the battle. Now, I wasn't in Landmark Lectures. Were you in that?
No.
Well, I wasn't, because I've never been known as a landmarker by accusation or admiration. So I'm not smart enough, and I'm working to get there, because I consider it the highest as far as when you want to, if you want to accuse me of that, I would say, well, finally, I made it.
Yes.
But I kept working so hard to be stigmatized in that way. But I do notice that when they were doing Landmark Lectures, some of this friction arose, and I don't know why or how. I don't know how you could assert what's self-evident in the Bible. The Bible says it's the Father's house, the Spirit's temple, and Christ's body. I'm not sure what more I would want to know of the ecclesia where I'm a member. I wouldn't want to know that the ordinances there were just, I don't know, a feature that might be of interest rather than essential to assuring everything that God wants for us, from us, and for us. I'm not sure.
As I've said through the years, pastoring, that if the pastor is doing his job feeding the flock, and if the church is doing her job being fed and applying that teaching, then if a member starts straying in some doctrinal way or lifestyle way or something, we should be able to just simply say to them regarding their baptism, remember your promise.
Exactly.
It really just boils down to that, doesn't it?
That's
Remember
right.
your
That's right.
promise.
Yep.
And sometimes that's enough to really wake them up. Other times, not so much. But hey, listen, we don't want to keep you much longer. Time is precious.
I've only 15 minutes, and I'm done. 15 minutes.
We don't really want to get into politics too much, but in general, there is a presidential election coming up next year, and the rhetoric is already heating up quite a lot.
Right.
Can you put on your prophet's hat and kind of express what you're expecting or worried about, or you see on the horizon over the next year or so regarding America and the effect it might have on our country?
The best I can say is that not a single one of us can predict what's getting ready to happen next year in the elections and in the primaries. It is so crazy. I'm just thankful to know that I've got a Heavenly Father, that He's watching over all of it, and all of this is going to come about the way that He wants it to be. We may not like some of the things that we get saddled with. I don't think there's any way you can predict what's going to happen, who's going to win, who's going to get elected, who's going to get unelected. But I'm just going to keep trusting the Heavenly Father and know that The guy I won elected might not get elected, but I've still got a church to pastor. I've still got the Bible to preach, and I've still got people to teach to.
I often say to people that I try not to live my life or pastor my church or be husband to my wife based on who is president or governor or senator. I have my preferences and I cast my votes, and most of the time my vote loses.
And if I tried to regulate my life on who the president is, I'd have had to crawl in a hole a long time ago.
Well, I'll just throw in my 2 cents as we conclude our 15-minute session. But several people in our church learned a hard lesson, noticing that opponents of principles and values were more dedicated, were more determined, were more persistent, and they were more aggressive. And I studied the history of Baptists and saw them so influential that the founding fathers would collaborate with them. I saw them so instrumental that Einstein was able to come to this country because of their insistence that there be no Church of Rome, no Church of the United States, that is, like Church of Rome, Church of England, Church of Geneva. And now it seems that we're so disengaged from the front line, which is back to the stand away. I don't know that people understand that the Lord's ruling his universe through his churches. I don't know that he really needed the convention of the Democrats or the Republicans, but they certainly would need us. I know we can remember, what was it, 1980? Ronald Reagan said, you can't endorse me, but I can endorse you all, talking to the moral majority or whatever it was. I don't know where you would find a moral consensus that would be committed to I don't think people believe there's implications anymore that are taking place. That, like, I have grandchildren, I'm very interested in their futures. I don't see people that are interested in their future as taking this as seriously as we could take it. Again, it's the stand away. It's like, what did Doris Day used to sing?
Que sera, sera.
Yeah.
Whatever will be, will be.
I mean, it's like a person can have a good enough life without, which seems to be placating, is requiring so little now. Just our standard of living, even on the low scale, is so high that it's hard to get people's attention when you're telling them you're being led down a path that will ultimately lead in destruction. And like I said, I don't raise my voice anymore because I can't. I've lost most of it, but it's definitely
really encourage your members to be politically active.
Yeah, relevant. We're here. We're salt and light, and I mean, we're here to make the difference in both fields of politics and religion. We're here to call people to come out and those in it to do right. So,
do you get a sense that things are so crazy in the political world, not just our country, but around the world, that when Paul talked about we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, that there almost seems to be a sense that the spirit world, the spirit rulers, are really in play more than the human leaders right now.
That's right. That's right.
They're just kind of the puppets that the evil spirit world is operating through. And of course, that's what will lead up to the man of sin being able to come on the scene.
Well, you're speaking of the forces behind it, and that's what's not being taken seriously. I call them minions from hell. They're just inundating everything, and you see people that are just almost like just going through the motions, whichever way the wind's blowing, and they don't realize that's the prince of the power of the air.
That's right. That's right.
Try to tell them you're just going along in a path of destruction from your own life, but the future that once was held so, I don't know how to say it. I mean, people once treasured the future of what they were entrusted to guard. Like I said, the ordinances were once something people guarded, the value of the church, the value of the truth, the light, the way. And it just seems, I guess indifference is the word, which is worse than hate.
Do you find yourself like me, more and more trying to bring out as best you can in your preaching this side-by-side mystery of iniquity growing stronger, but at the same time, the sovereignty of God still clearly in place?
Absolutely.
That's true.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Well, that's why I said I think that we stepping back into the work that he's doing would be great for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah, tell people I don't want to be a spectator in the kingdom of God. I don't want to.
As my
Wow.
pastor said growing up, don't major in the minors.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's exactly right. So,
My
What else
son,
would you like to bring up, Mike or
Well,
brother? What else?
well, on this same topic, my son, he loves sports. And so he frames it as if your uniform doesn't have grass stains, you haven't been in the game.
that's
That's
it.
exactly right.
That's perfect.
You know,
And you two, brethren, need to pray for his oldest son, Philip Maney, who is 46 years old or so,
48.
and actually becoming a pastor for the first time.
ah,
And
Is that where Dr. Derek Rhodes goes to church?
yes, he's going to be Derek Rhodes' pastor. Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Derek Rhodes. I don't know how he found me. I think through YouTube, and boy, he
I'm
is
glad
really
he did, because he turned you on to us.
Yeah,
But,
that's how we heard of you. Yeah.
Philip
I
Maney
still
is
like him.
moving next month, and
Yeah.
as we like to say, all of the thousands of U-Haul trailers leaving California for other states, there's one U-Haul trailer leaving Missoula, Montana next week,
Oh.
coming into California.
The only one.
Well, I'll send an evangelist to California, but I don't know. I'm
Yes.
kidding. I don't know. I don't know
Yes.
your plans, but I know there's definitely challenges there. I can't even
Yeah.
imagine. Well, that's good that he's going to be there, because Dr. Rhodes is the fellow I told you about, Bible numerics and things.
all right.
I really like Derek. He'll ask me questions. I said, I don't work on that stuff. That's Dr. Penn. And
Mhm.
yeah, I have people ask me, calculate some for me. I said, I don't know. I don't know anything about it. If we weren't working for Dr. Penn, we probably wouldn't be researching as much. But he's got us back on track to be more productive in the future. So I'm looking forward to our publications. So,
Oh, good. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you
Yes.
for your ministries. It's been a blessing to talk to you today, and I hope we stay in touch with each other on some level. And
we will. I'll be watching your videos. I may come on and make a shadow channel so I can comment without you knowing who it is.
so on our last Truth Be Told session, I think it was our last one. So Derek Rhodes is helping us out because he's such a techie person.
Mhm.
Yes.
And we mentioned at the end of, I think our last session, you may have to check it out, but Mike mentioned something about if people don't agree with us, that they can throw tomatoes at us.
Yes, I heard that. Yes.
But Derek put up a bunch of tomatoes smashing against the screen at the end of our video.
Well, I don't know if Derek's even saved. I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to make a conclusion from very little data. So yeah, he's too talented. That's what you have to deal with. And
Yes.
I'm not jealous of him, but he's like a singing preacher. It really puts him in another.
You're back to that again, huh?
It's not a bitter spirit. It's just a deeply rooted resentment. So,
All I can say is it is what it is, brother.
yeah.
Yes.
Brother Johnson, are you with your singing? Are you like, I've done a lot of this through the years, go to special meetings and I'll get elected to preach, and I have 2 or 3 favorite female singers that I've known for years, longtime friends, and I'll almost always ask them to sing a special before I get up to preach. Then usually I'll say something along the lines of, because people would ask, how come you always have so-and-so sing a special before you preach? And I'll tell the people that way, at least if they don't like the sermon, they can at least say, what a great special before he got up to preach.
There you go. Right.
Is that your philosophy?
I play music video. Most of the kids never heard of Porter Wagner, so contemporary music to them. So,
I used to watch Porter Wagner show every week.
yeah, I know. I had to work. So.
No.
Well, God bless you.
I'll tell you what, brother, I've really enjoyed this, and I just you've inspired me. I'm very confident in your ministries. It's good to hear that some good has come out of Arkansas.
Well, now I need to warn you. I'm doing a summary of your book, The Indwelling Spirit. I think.
Yeah, I saw the one episode. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna evaluate it, put it on the board, synopsis, things like that. So
Yeah.
it just it's impartiality, but I think it's good because you've already covered core topics.
Mhm.
But I keep asking my friends to tell me where's the problem, where's the contradictions, where's the friction, because I think they're avoiding things they've never even studied.
Mm,
There seems to be a stigma now,
yeah.
whatever that is, I don't know. But everything that drew me to the school, and even later, a father who finally agreed that, yeah, that was a good school to attend. Of course, he never set foot on the campus, but that's another story. But and he died very young, but that's another. Anyway, he finally said that was the kind of school and that was the kind of faith that he remembered when he came out of some terrible things when he's growing up. But to be tossed out like they were because of the convention system was not an individual problem. It was a system they had, and it really cost a lot of churches, from what I understand. So anyway,
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you so much, brethren. Thank you, Brother Rick,
No.
for
A pleasure. We've enjoyed the visit.
absolutely.
And it's good to
Well-
get to know you, Brother Johnson and Brother Carter.
Yes.
Next time, if we ever do this again, we're going to give Brother Johnson 90% of the speaking time.
well, let me tell you,
I don't know if that's possible.
he is not being forthright. Okay, this man, never mind. He talks all the time. They talk so much in seminary. He would talk with Dr. Murray a foreign language. They would, I didn't know what they were doing. I would just sit there and pray and say, Lord, I have to go make a schedule and I have to come back tomorrow and I won't have time to go over this. So
Y'all have to understand, talking about the 90% thing, this is therapy. Being able to speak is therapy for Brother Carter.
Mm.
So this
I'll
is
go back to my room.
I'm glad we could have this therapy session.
Yes. Yeah. What are your therapy rates, Brother Rick?
I do itemize, so yeah, I tell people I go to the hospital, I tell them if they ask me too many questions, they begin to be counted and have prayer, then consultation, then counsel.
Yeah.
It adds up. It adds up.
It adds up. Yes. Oh,
Well,
well,
God
Lord
bless
bless you
us all.
guys. Lord bless you guys. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, let's stay in touch. Maybe we can do this more often. A brother in California is starting this preachers forum.
Oh my, yeah, that'd be good.
He's concerned about churches staying connected, even though we're
Amen.
scattered. And so the first session was last month. So the next one will be, Rick, it's October 9th, I think it is. It's he hosts it from California there. So if you're interested in being on the list, he would send you out the link.
He
You can join
he invited
that.
Brother Dillard for the first one. Brother Dillard was on our first session and said a lot of really good things. So
Mhm.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah.
He makes me so nervous. I have to be careful. Not intimidating. I'm very threatened.
Yes.
He's quite a weighted gentleman.
Yeah. We interviewed him. So be sure and look at that video when you get a chance too.
Well, we've actually had lunch with him once.
yes.
So we're not trying to top you. We're just saying we've sat down and had lunch with him. So, and we survived. I had to wear glasses for a while. I was blinded by the light. So anyway,
Yes,
It was a
yes,
joy.
we were too.
I see my
pastoring him is difficult.
pest control man just showed up at my front door wanting to talk to me. So I'm sorry, my
Pastor
pest
got
control
the
man
sign
has to top this, but
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, brethren. Lord bless you guys.
Absolutely. Been a
Be in
pleasure.
touch.
I don't know how to turn it off, so y'all do whatever y'all do. So,
Okay, I'll turn it off from here. Okay.
okay, bye.
Bye.